Hi, and welcome to a rather somber episode of the We Need to Vote podcast, where we will not be reviewing anything, but sadly instead talking about the news, movie news still, or the fact there really won't be much movie news for the foreseeable future. And as always, I'm joined by Jose. How's it going, Jose?
I'm good, but also concerned, honestly.
Concerned is the word, man. I mean, just days ago, as we record this, on the 14th of July, the Screen Actors Guild has also joined the Writers Guild in striking against the studios, mainly over declining pay and residuals in the streaming age, and also safeguards against future use of their images by AI. And these are almost the same issues that the Writers Guild have been striking about since May, in terms of declining pay and AI taking their work as well. However, let's play devil's advocate for a minute on the actors. Aren't all actors rich? Why should we have sympathy for all these mega...
They are not all rich.
Exactly. Many actors are not actually that rich. And as we said, it's only the megastars and like someone who's the lead in a film really gets paid that much. There was a great article from the New York Times, actually, about the pay of the stars of Orange is the New Black and how spectacularly low paid they were in the early days of streaming compared to their traditional counterparts on broadcast TV. So, for example, in Orange is the New Black, the lead actress Taylor Schilling was on $35,000 an episode. And this was for the first couple of seasons when the show was winning all the awards. It was getting all the press everywhere. An average wage for an actor on a main network show is over $100,000 an episode. And that's before you get to the bigger shows where someone's like on $1 million an episode, you know.
Yeah.
Especially
let's emphasize that. Let's emphasize that, Neil, on a regular network show versus streaming. I think that's the big difference here.
Oh, well, I think that's the key issue there. Yeah. Basically, if you're on a streaming show, you don't get residuals. That's one of the key things about it here.
And it seems, I have to say, I was surprised that even just the upfront pay is a lot lower than I expected. I didn't know that information.
Well, and so I read the whole article and it's really, really in depth. And because Orange is the New Black had quite a largely mixed race female cast, and there was a very large cast on the show, and again, hardly anyone was really that well known on it. Some of the lower level actors in it were barely making $3,000 a month. Or sorry, $3,000 per episode.
Yeah.
And some of the stuff shocking. I was reading that most of the cast had to keep their day jobs while they were working on the show because the pay was so low. Imagine being mobbed in the street by fans telling you how great you are, and yet you're still barely making enough to pay your rent and put food on your table, despite being in one of the top-rated shows on Netflix for multiple years. I mean, it is pretty sickening. We found out a little bit more on that when there's having some like big awards party at Ted Sarandos, who's the owner of Netflix, and he claimed at the party over 100 million people watched Orange is the New Black, which is more than Game of Thrones was getting at its peak on HBO. And yet the actors had to pay for their own transport to set at times. They had to pay for their own flights to awards ceremonies. I mean, it is when you have this idea of all actors are really well paid in that. There was a stat I saw somewhere, I think this morning, and I don't know how truthful it is, but it was something crazy like 97% of actors are barely making a living wage, and it's only that other sort of 2-3% that are actually doing really, really well out of it.
Yeah. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. All these are SAG actors. These are people who sign up. That can include commercial actors, the ones that you see in commercials. It spreads the gamut, right?
Yeah. Basically, I mean, if you're in Screen Actors Guild, it's pretty much any acting from the way I understand it. And again, I'm by no means even an expert. This is literally just from what I've read from the outrage that's been pouring forth in the last couple of days, which is why I thought we'd do a quick one and talk about it today.
Yeah, this is great. There's a lot of information coming on, and I'm glad that we're able to cover it pretty quickly because things could be changing very fast in the next week. But with the actors joining, this really adds to the tensions of what potential content we can get in the future.
Well, I don't think we're going to be getting any, to be fair. Like, everything is just been halted.
Lack of content.
Well, I mean, like I say, there was the three main guilds that the studios deal with. There's the Directors Guild, who struck a deal that no one seems to know the parameters of a few months ago. The writers do seem, it's that kind of, I've seen quite a few memes where everyone's like, oh, people are finally paying attention now. The actors are there. Forget about the writers. The writers have literally been on strike for 3 months at this point, since May. Yeah. And it's only the actors coming out that's kind of getting more and more attention. But I mean, every production is pretty much shut down. I know I was reading a bit more about it, and in the UK, our union's called Equity. So a lot of shows, so like House of the Dragon, for example, can keep filming because it's being filmed in the UK, over in
Oh,
Ireland.
wow.
It's got a
Okay.
large cast. Most of the cast are mainly British or European actors in it, so
Oh,
they're
wow.
not bound by the same rules.
So we might
So
have a lot of stuff imported from European
that would be
stages.
the dream, right? I think if you're if you're in the States, right, would you rather loads of more really bad reality TV because that's coming? That's really
Yeah.
coming. I've
Yeah.
read that like so many shows are getting new seasons and expanded runs and spin-off shows
Mm,
of like just utter crap that I can't stand. But
yeah.
I mean, if there was a positive, you'd be like, well, okay, import some really good foreign shows. There's
Yeah.
loads of great shows out there. I mean,
I mean,
get a couple of
I mean,
Scandi noirs on, man.
I don't know that reference, but I'm sure it's great.
Scandi noir. Okay, around the birth of streaming, there was some brilliant, like really dark, bleak detective dramas and murder
Oh,
mystery
okay.
shows coming out of Scandinavia, so Sweden, Norway, Denmark.
Ah,
So Girl
Scandi.
with a Dragon Tattoo would be like the big example from a film point of view.
Wow. I
And
forgot that was from Scandinavia.
I think The Killing was the big one. The Killing, and that was remade in the States as The Killing as well. And it had Joel Kinnaman in the US remake. A lot of people like were watching, all these foreign shows, and that could be good, but I just don't see it happen, sadly.
So I agree. I think that would be a nice best case scenario, but and it probably will happen to some degree, but I agree there will probably be more just reality TV pushed, a lot of reruns.
Although the
And
irony for that for me is right, a reality TV, they still have script writers. So how does that work?
I think it gets taken over by executives kind of writing scenarios, so to speak, but they don't
So the
control
producer,
the
you're a
actual
producer
narrative.
writer. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. Because I think they're gonna. How else did it happen? Because this happened in 2008 with the writer strike. They created reality shows, but obviously they needed someone to put it together, so they had to work around the titles of people's jobs. And I wanted to kind of point out that the writer strike would happen in 2008, but the actor strike, that the fact that they're both happening right now, that hasn't happened since 1960.
And do you know
And
who was head of the
I
actors
don't
union? The head
I
of
don't
at the minute it's Fran Drescher, who used to be in The
Oh,
Nanny. She's head at the
yes.
moment. Back in 1960, it was Ronald Reagan.
You're kidding me.
No, Ronald Reagan was the head of the actors union back then when the
Wow,
last strike happened.
that's one of the most interesting fun facts I've heard in a while now with all of this. I've seen some it's amazing how fast this content is coming out, because I've seen some videos already, or some just articles that I've read that talking about all the intricacies of what's going on. And I have officially even seen one YouTuber who talks exclusively about movies who decided, you know what? I don't know if this sounds weird. I don't know if this even makes sense, but I'm going to go on a strike talking about movies. He's going to figure out other content to post, but right now he just felt like it was his responsibility as a movie critic and a movie YouTuber to decide to go on strike. I should have probably written his name down, but I was on my phone earlier yesterday, so I didn't have a chance to give that guy credit. But it has happened. YouTube and internet stars are also now considered part of the whole content media thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, if it's coming from an altruistic place and like in solidarity with them, great. But also at the same time, it could just simply be this is just me playing devil's advocate and being a cynic. Is that you can't interview any celebrities now you can't promote your films, so you
That's
can't
very
go on
true.
podcasts, so you can't have guests on. But again, the shades of grey in it has got to be like a minefield, right? So say you wanted to have Cillian Murphy to come on your podcast, he's scheduled to come on and talk about Oppenheimer. Well, that can't happen. Okay, but can you have Cillian Murphy to come on your podcast and talk about a past film he's done? Maybe, because he's not promoting the new one. So I don't know how this is going to work.
Can you have
So I
Cillian
think a
Murphy
lot of
come on and
content-
talk about cooking?
Yeah. So I think again, and no one really knows how this works, because when we had the previous strike, podcasts weren't as big as they were then. The whole
No, you're
internet
right.
thing wasn't nowhere near as bad. But let's talk about the villains. In any good story, there are villains, and in real
Yes.
life, some of the most despicable villains are. Well, it's funny. GQ published an article that has already been taken down, apparently, by a freelance writer, and it was called "The Most Hated Man in Hollywood," and it's been removed already. And it was about David Zaslav.
And tell us about David Zaslav.
So he is the head of Warner Brothers Discovery. So he's the guy who came in,
Ah,
lost took HBO off HBO Max, the most recognizable mark of quality in American TV for decades. No, let's concentrate on the other part of it, not the HBO bit. He's the one who shit-canned the Batgirl film and wrote off stuff for tax. And generally, he's not well liked. It's a simple way to say it.
No, I think those are very good points to create towards not being well liked by the general audiences for the very least.
Well, did you see the story? There was an executive. It was a Deadline article that came out last week, and it was about how the studios won't even negotiate with the writers until October, because that's when they think with Christmas coming up, writers have been out and work for almost 6 months by then. They're going to be poor. They're going to be on the verge of losing their houses. And then they'll come back to the table and take any deal that's offered. And
I did see that.
What are the optics on that, man? I mean, why would you ever put that in print and say that's what your tactic is?
Yeah, I'm pretty surprised that they had the balls to even say that out loud, let alone have it officially on record. And it's interesting because I did hear Sean Gunn, brother of James Gunn, who responded to that. And he's like, that's just despicable. I'm paraphrasing. I forgot what he said, honestly. But I'm watching all this content. It's just going so quickly, but it's really hitting home just how much these executives just don't care. They're really worried about their own bottom line. And
I think that is the problem. I think that is a problem with modern day movie making. Is that if you look at like when the birth of the blockbusters in the 70s and towards the end of the 70s and the 80s and all that, and although the number one rule was your executives, you're there to make money, they were still film people. They still had that. These people who are running the studios now, they're money people. They're corporations. They're not people who started in a film studio, worked their way up, got to that position, and know the inner workings of the industry. And at least in my opinion, I mean, I could be wrong.
Well, that's the funny part. I did see a video talking about how the last strike, there were tentpole movies that were like family musicals, westerns, and I think one other kind of movies that they were being focused on. It was very heavily focused. And then after the strike, when negotiations were struck, that's when more interesting directors brought in to create more content, like more movies that were different. And that's why you were saying the 70s began the era of the blockbusters. And hopefully we're able to get to that again, where studios and even streaming, they're able to create more content at a lower scale with more interesting stories. But the hard part is streaming is much different than what the movie industry was before, because streaming, they don't give us numbers. They don't give the public numbers.
How can you decide what a metric of success is if each place isn't if each studio isn't telling you how many people are watching the shows? I mean, like, and we talked about this in the past with Netflix canceling shows, but wait, it was number one on your platform for 2 months solid, and now you've cancelled it. I think one of the problems is, and this is just again my opinion, that the execs are just taking way too much money off the top line. Zaslav has made close to 500 million in the last couple of years.
Wow, yeah.
Now
it's ridiculous.
If you've got someone in a show you're making and they can't pay their rent and you're taking home that amount of money, and I mean, 500 million, that's 2 Marvel movies right there for this guy's wages for the year, right?
Yeah.
In fact, I remember when the writers submitted their first list of what they wanted in the negotiations, I believe everything they wanted would have cost the studios, because they negotiate this every 3 years. And the last one got rushed through with pretty much no opposition from anyone because of COVID. They just wanted to get everyone back to work. So I think on both sides, they all just agreed whatever to get back to work straight away. But I think what the writers wanted, it came to around 650 million. Oh, and that's a cost for all the writers over the next 3 years.
Wow. Yeah.
So what one guy was making was almost 2/3 of what the total number is for all writers. I mean, that's just obscene. It is obscene, man. Actually, it's funny you say about that. You said about the guy Sean Gunn commenting on that article that came out. The best video I've seen popped online yesterday. Ron Perlman. Have you seen his one?
No, I haven't seen it.
So check that out afterwards. Yeah, you got Ron Perlman, who Hellboy. Well, he's also well known for playing Clay from Sons of Anarchy. He does this clip where he goes full Clay. More or less threatening the executive personally in a video. Like, he's just like, he calls him motherfucker about 5 times. And he goes, "We all know who you are, and we all know where you live." And
Wow.
karma's a bitch. Like, so you're like, I'm
Wow.
paraphrasing, but he's just like, it's like, I'm pretty sure he's just inciting people to go get this guy. Like, which, I'm not going to disagree with. I mean, obviously, in a
Yeah. Yeah.
metaphorical sense, as it were. One of the big problems with all this is residuals. And again, another story today: ABC, who are like one of your main national broadcasters in the States, Miss Marvel is going to be screened on ABC, despite it being a Disney Plus show, created as a Disney Plus show. And I'm sure all the deals, all the actors had it, and the creatives had in place was for it just to be a streaming show. So, right, does that
Yeah.
mean they're not going to make any money from it being screened on national TV as opposed to a streaming service?
Here's a funny thing that I saw. Let's put a little noise effect for this is my first comment ever mentioning Threads, because I saw on Threads that there was a low-level actor who I forget how much work he had done, but he was opening up multiple envelopes. And he says that after opening up like 10 to 20 envelopes, he only made $85 with combined with all those envelopes from residuals that he did done from streaming. And I'm pretty sure you don't get envelopes every day. So the fact that he had collected enough envelopes over time to only create $85 worth of pay from residuals from a Netflix show, I'm gonna tell you right now, I don't think they're gonna be very happy with what these residuals will get
Well,
them from.
that's the thing. I don't think they've ever established a sliding scale of going up for
Mhm.
residuals. I mean, if the studios need to tell people, there almost needs to be some kind of like where you've got like all the different motion picture associations, and they all have to like play by the same rules, as it were. There almost needs to be
Mhm.
like that for streamers,
Yeah.
right? There needs to be like I don't know, some kind of like overarching body, and everyone has to sign up and agree to it, and then
Mhm.
publish your figures, publish your viewing, have them independent, have an independent company that verifies streaming viewing figures somehow. Again, I don't
Yeah.
know. I mean, I don't know how you'd even go about doing that, or how you could even check
Yeah.
the information you're getting is true. But then that's because that was one of the things one of the actors from Orange Is the New Black said. How can we judge our worth if we don't know the level of success of what we're making? We're getting told it's
Yeah.
really good, but we've got no definitive proof on numbers.
Mhm.
So how
Mhm.
can you negotiate your contracts?
Yeah,
It
it's
is
really it comes down to the networks or the streaming companies being able to provide optics. Because I mean, at first, think about it. Netflix is the king. I don't know officially or not still, but like it started with showing other TV shows,
yeah.
other networks, and now not only does it make its own shows, it makes its own movies. They're on the scale as big as all these other blockbusters, and they don't provide any numbers. They just, yeah, we can keep doing what we're doing. And like think about it though, the budgets on some of these large movies look like they should be the same as like Marvel movies sometimes. And how do they afford it? It's from all the streaming, but yet we don't know one little number. All I've seen is people guessing at what the potential numbers could be across the board for any situation I've seen with streaming in general.
I mean, it's just, yeah. I mean, there was another really good article about the Netflix model. I forget where I read this, but in the last couple of weeks, and how
Can you tell we
actually,
rest this, folks?
yeah, we are so good with our sources today.
Yes.
But there was an article, and it was saying about how the Netflix model isn't working, and
Oh,
almost
it
every
isn't.
streaming service is going back and to dropping an episode by the week. And I think
Mm,
we've talked about this before. I definitely talked about it with
yeah.
people in the office.
I think you're right in terms of like Apple, their shows are weekly for
Yep,
sure. Like they might give you one or two in the beginning and then they go weekly. And I think that's a great job because, yes, sometimes it's nice to binge, but it's great to keep that word of mouth and the traction by doing
that's
it weekly.
exactly. I think with streaming and a binge model, it worked because of COVID. That's when it really took off. People didn't
Hmm.
have anything to do. They were trapped in a house. You just wanted to sit there and just watch. You needed something to occupy your mind for those year and a half, 2 years. But with the reduction in the amount of stuff coming out because of that, I mean, we kind of back up again to where we were. And again, this strike now is going to cause a delay in stuff, and there's going to be a shortage of material again. So, I think a show has more legs and can become bigger, more of a cultural touchstone if it is weekly, because everyone might not watch it at the same time, but most people are watching it that same day. Now, with binging shows, you're going to have the hardcore people who will sit there and 8 hours straight through, boom, right, I've done the new series.
Mm-hmm.
And then other people are like, I can't do that. And so you don't have the same level of conversation, even amongst people in the same office, maybe, because someone will be a big fan of the show and someone goes, oh, I'll watch it when I get the chance, or I'm going to, and it just doesn't work anymore. Game of Thrones is a perfect example. Look at season 8, which a lot of people didn't like. David, we can hear you screaming from miles away about how they ruined the show in the last season and how I slightly disagree with you on that. But anyway, we'll get to that some other time.
Ooh.
We are going to do a Game of Thrones episode sometime because I'm pretty sure that'll just be me nodding and agreeing and then David talking for about 4.5 hours. If everyone had had the chance to binge watch Game of Thrones season 8 in one day, word of mouth would have got out about the ending. Spoilers would have got out. There wouldn't have been the big build up to it. And the interest would have just fallen off a cliff. Yeah, people wouldn't have cared. They would have gone, oh, that's who sits on the iron front of the iron. That's bollocks. I don't care. So-and-so kills so-and-so. Oh, it's rubbish. I don't want to see it. And I guarantee you, and with streaming, that's kind of, and the binge model, that's kind of what's happened. But I think we need to kind of get off that and get back to the strikes, get a little, rein it back in. With the actors' strike just happening, we had the Oppenheimer walkout the other night. So we had the world premiere of Oppenheimer in the UK, and all the actors were there. And then they walked the red carpet and they left and didn't go to the film. Just leaving Christopher Nolan on stage to basically say, yeah, they've left now to go and write their strike placards.
Yes, all in solidarity, which I thought was pretty damn amazing, honestly. To do it in the middle of an event and then to just, you know what? We are actors that respect the situation. We're going to.
They're all members of the guild.
Oh, yeah, that too. I mean, but if they were there in the first place, they could have easily just been like, well, let's write it out and then we can leave after the movie. But or was it happening in real time as like?
I think it was real time. I think the deadline in the US was around the time in the UK in the evening.
Oh, wow.
So I think it was like 12 midday your time. And it was like whatever time over here at the time.
Yeah.
But
wow, that's actually pretty interesting then.
Because again, these negotiations apparently like right down to the minute. Apparently, the strike could have even happened a few weeks back. But I read another story where the studios was stonewalling a little bit purely because they wanted all the promotional stuff to come out for Barbie, Oppenheimer, and Mission Impossible 7. Because arguably, they are the 3 big films of the summer. In fact, I was looking at August releases, right? There is next to nothing big coming out at all. You've got Haunted Mansion and you've got The Meg 2. And that is it off the top of my head.
And the funny thing is they're both kind of sequels because Haunted Mansion is the second attempt at that movie. Because the first one was the Eddie Murphy movie, but I'm digressing.
Well, do you know what they did? They had the premiere of that, I think, yesterday in the States, the Haunted Mansion, and then they had no actors to walk the red carpet. So they just got some kind of employee there to dress up as the characters from the film and wear like an outfit. It was bizarre and not very good, apparently. Moving on to AI, and that's one of the kind of key issues about it. Christopher Nolan had this to say on AI. He had a special screening of Oppenheimer, and he compared the rapid development of AI with the events in his movie about the creation of the atomic bomb. You know, one of the main reasons the actors are striking is because of fears around AI replacing them and using their likenesses in perpetuity. And he said, the rise of companies in the last 15 years, bandying words like algorithm, not knowing what they mean in any kind of meaningful mathematical sense. These guys don't know what an algorithm is, Nolan said. People in my business talking about it, they just don't want to take responsibility for whatever that algorithm does. Applied to AI, that's a terrifying possibility. Terrifying, not least because AI systems will go into defensive infrastructure ultimately. They'll be in charge of nuclear weapons. To say that is a separate entity from the person wielding programming, putting that AI to use, then we're doomed. It has to be about accountability. We have to hold people accountable for what they do with the tools they have. With the labor disputes going on in Hollywood right now, a lot of it, and when we talk about AI, when we talk about these issues, they are all ultimately born from the same thing, which is when you innovate with technology, you have to maintain accountability. Wow. Yeah. That makes me want to go and see Oppenheimer even more, you know.
Oh, definitely. I think anyways, I think he's so right. And to kind of piggyback on his quote, it kind of goes with it and it kind of does not. But I want to say Steven Spielberg, I actually just saw this again. I'm like just coming across all this content so quickly. Steven Spielberg said maybe just about over 10 years ago, predicted that there was going to be a time when some of these big blockbusters are going to fail just because of the fact that studios are putting so much money to get a big return. They're not taking the time to really create something good. And when these big blockbusters fail, there's going to be a shift in how movies are made. And he kind of stepped back apparently after the interview to kind of explain himself. But I think he hit the nail on the head right there with things are changing, and with studios putting out big blockbusters that are not doing well, like honestly, Marvel films are big
Indiana
cause of
Jones
this.
didn't do very well either.
Indiana Jones, the irony of that, and then just like movies with a lot of CG that they're trying to churn out, and it's all because of what's going on with streaming and trying to create these tentpoles. I think what's gonna happen is eventually we're gonna have some great content or great movies and shows that are a little more smaller budget, or a lot more smaller budget.
I 100% agree, man. You need to bring that back, because there's no pathway as well for a lot of people in the craft to get up to that level of blockbuster if every single film that's made is like costing 250, 300 million. You know, I'll give you a good example. I finally got to see Asteroid City the other day. I love Wes Anderson, man. I've seen it twice now in the last week and a half.
So you recommend it?
Really, really enjoy it. I mean, if you like Wes Anderson, because it's very Wes Anderson. But it cost 25 million.
Wow, that low, huh?
Yeah, and I looked at the figures on a lot of his other movies, and they're all around the same.
Man, he definitely knows how to make it work.
Yeah, and because although he knows his films aren't going to be big multiplex crowd pleasers, so he makes them in mind, probably knowing, and the studio he works with probably knowing, right, these films are for a particular niche audience, but that level of success will be making its budget back, or maybe doubling it. So, you know, if it can make 40, 50 million, that's a success for them.
And I don't know what the case is for every studio, but it also seems like A24 and Neon, those guys are putting out masterpieces. Honestly, they're just doing a great job.
If you think along the horror lines as well, Blumhouse, Jason Blum, he's doing low budget. And again, I think Hollywood should take a note from should take a look at like horror. Right, horror is a really good genre to illustrate this. And just in low budget filmmaking in general. But if you haven't got the money, you need to be creative. And from that creativity, you're going to get something original and clever and something that people want to see. Blair Witch Project, that when it came out was one of the most successful independent films of all time. Because although I think Lionsgate released it, these guys just made it themselves. They made it and then sold it to Lionsgate. Yeah, and because they produced it, did everything, they made an absolute shit ton of money on that. They didn't have to work again after doing Blair Witch Project. They made so much money on it. Same
That's the dream, right?
Yeah, well, Halloween, John Carpenter back in 1978. Again, that was independent at the time. And Texas Chainsaw Massacre, when it came out, independent. So you are going to get, hopefully, like you say, this causes more independent films to be made, more independent shows with a lower budget, shows where more creativity, and we don't just keep getting studios trying to replicate what was successful in the past and get more stuff that's just makes you go, shit, I've never seen that before. I want to see. And
also give shows that stream time to breathe and time to grow. Because we've talked about this before. The first episodes or the first seasons of The Office and Parks and Rec, characters were very much different. And with rewrites and understanding where the characters were coming from, they were able to grow into people that we enjoyed watching. Well,
I think they was able to course correct. They realized it wasn't working.
Yes, there we go. That's a much better way of explaining.
They realized season one of both of those shows wasn't really working. I'd probably say Parks and Rec more than The Office. The Office season one basically just followed a lot of the UK one and did it in its way. And then once they got past that, I was like, right, now we don't have to be compared to the English one. We can do what we want. And even at the time when I was watching the American one, I was just like, I prefer the American one to the English one. I'm sorry, I do. Wow. And in England, everyone was just like, you can't say that. No, that's blah, blah, blah. And I was like, no, I'm sorry. It is. There's so much more character development in there. And also, there's more than 6 episodes. You had 22 episodes in the second series, 25. Parks and Rec did the same. Parks and Rec is probably one of my favorite sitcoms purely because it was so successful within its niche. I mean, it was on the verge of getting cancelled every year, but it still kept chugging away. And so much so that they wrapped everything up in its second to last season. And then he got given another series. And I was like, okay. That whole last series was basically like a victory lap tour. So they did a time jump and every episode focused on one of the characters and what they were doing there. And it was just, I
Oh,
mean, not many
wow.
shows get a victory lap season, man. So yeah, it was really good, man. So but yeah, we kind of raised the threat of AI. Now, I mean, we have to talk about it in all industries, both in our sort of day jobs as well. I mean, I'm a video editor, and we've trialed an AI editing tool that did a 2 hour edit that would take me to do, and it did it in 37 seconds. Now,
Wow.
it didn't work completely
Hmm. Hmm.
because the software would just immediately cut to whoever was talking. And so if someone
Oh.
was like going, yes, or making just agreement noises, the camera would keep cutting. But
Mm.
it's not going to be long before the software can do that, or you can
Yes.
program it. So, are they going to start reducing editors then? But how does a computer decide what the best take is? When I had the interview with Dan Crinian a few months back, and he was saying when he worked on a really bad show, and you had to in the edit, he had to completely change the point of the scene, and there was a shot of a character that was completely not intended for what it was originally shot for, but because they had to retool it in post, that shot then was perfect for that. The
Hmm.
computer's not going to know how to do that, so you're
Yeah.
always going to need someone to. It could be good for, and I think this is where people need to kind of get on with the AI. I think it's going to be good for. It's going to be very handy for as a
It's
tool
it's
to speed
it's a
things up.
tool. Oh, you
It's a
perfect
tool.
perfect word. I
Yeah.
was gonna say the same thing. It's a tool that makes it a lot easier. And yes, it can do amazing things, but it still needs someone to control it. Where we use the term AI and we think of it as something that's godly.
Skynet.
Yeah, and we're almost to the point where we're afraid of it now. And granted, I think these execs don't understand the term either when it comes to script writing and creating content. And I use the word content to just to be able to wrap things up in a big bubble. But as a photographer, we have software that is able to do great things because of these AI updates, and they're still in their infancy. But again, they're not perfect. And B, they're just filling in spots, or like the best example that I think people can understand is we're taking people out of the backgrounds. I
Yeah.
literally had a photograph where I took people off some steps in the background, and I had to tweak a little bit here and there, but for the most part, it took care of 95% of the job that I normally do in like a fraction of the time. But again, it wasn't perfect. I still had to adjust a few things. It's a tool. And I think that these executives are thinking, oh, it's something that can take over a person's job. No. I mean, right now, no. But who knows what it's going to be 10 years from now? Because I'll be honest, this computer stuff is really advancing very quickly.
Well, I've got a question. So, I mean, obviously, my area, like you say, you need someone to program it for the editing. You always need an
Hmm.
editor. You can't just
Yeah.
hand it all over to the computer. But what about the creation of like AI photos and artwork?
I, I
Like,
I've seen what that can do. You can create prompts, but again, you're creating prompts, and so you can tell it to do things, but it's still like telling a child to create an object, and you're still at the mercy of the child. You can't like,
and I suppose for stuff like
yeah.
portraits, pictures,
Mm,
you have to have a person doing that. The computer can take it, but again, getting that reaction. I remember from the days when we used to work
yeah.
on cruise ships, man, and like you'd have to
Hmm.
smudge passengers and get them to react to the camera. Or like
Yeah.
I remember if you had a small child or like a baby and was like they was playing up in the shoot, and the standard photographer trick I remember the guys doing was waving some keys off out at the edge of
Yeah.
the frame. So
Yeah.
the kid would look up and then you get the shot.
I mean,
Like,
the idea that the AI can create things is like, yeah, they're creating things off of the sources of the internet. So like celebrities, there's tons of content there to be pulled from. But like if you're just a regular person from a city, it's like, oh, create something, a portrait of Joe Blow from Baltimore.
yeah,
The AI doesn't have all that content to do that. I hope not, at least. But like, there's still not the need to create photos.
yeah, definitely.
It's just AI right now is just a tool. Right now,
Right now.
tool.
Now, I kind of worry about how this delay is going to affect cinema chains. I mean, Cineworld are the world's second biggest chain, and they've been in administration pretty much since COVID hit. So, with no new films coming
Hmm.
out, maybe this time next year, if the strikes continue, it could really be the death knell for some cinema chains. However, I'm not kind of like doom and gloom. It's the end of cinema. No one's going to go out anymore to see a film. I don't believe that. But the cynic in me says right now, if lots of big chains go under, do you know what's going to happen? This is my prediction. The big studios are going to sweep in and buy them because the infrastructure is all there. And that
Wow.
means they then control the means of production and exhibition just like the old days of vertical integration in the original Hollywood studio system. They're not paying anything to the cinemas, then, are they? And what you
Wow.
could then have, you could have this cinema is owned by Netflix, so you can only watch Netflix films there. This cinema is owned by Apple. You can only watch Apple films there, and that could happen.
I I don't like that at all.
No, I don't like it at all, man. But I'm
That's
just,
scary, but surprisingly probable,
but
honestly.
that's the lesser of two evils for me, rather than having no cinemas whatsoever, right?
Yeah, but I don't think I don't think that there'll be
The
no
big one
cinemas,
there,
but
isn't it?
yeah, but I think what might happen is a little bit of a trimming as well, because here in Tampa, we've lost a lot of cinemas that were on smaller chains. For us, it's AMC theaters that are the big guys here in Tampa, at least, and they've survived. They've taken over a few other cinemas that just didn't last, but then they've also shut down some as well. Granted, one or two have been in malls, which I think malls in general have been just very slow. So it could be a combination of things, but I think your theory is very probable. Hopefully not going to happen, and
No.
maybe even the theater owners are going to scramble to push execs to make a deal
There's got to be
sooner.
some kind of deal, right? Because if you're a movie studio, that's why everyone, that's why a lot of people have been worried about my local cinema chain going broke. But the thing is, although they've been in administration, if they close completely, the studios have got a shitload less places to show their films, which means it's going to affect them making more money. So they're probably at the stage in a minute where they're going to have to pretty much take whatever they can just to keep these places open, just
Yeah.
to keep the money coming in. Because if they're closed, you're not going to make any money from them. I mean, if Cineworld, and I think they own Regal, although I think they're Regal in the States, I'm not 100% on that.
Regal
But
is a theater chain
one of the big
here.
ones. So if they just disappeared overnight and closed, that's going to make the studios how much less money?
Yeah.
So
I mean, it makes you wonder what the execs are planning for. If yes, they thought maybe the writers they can push to October, but were they expecting the actors to include themselves in this strike? That's a big question. Who knows? Maybe they were, but like, how long can they really push for cheap content with reality shows to
yeah,
let?
here we come to coming to the end of this one, Jose. I think
Yeah,
what does this
yeah.
mean going forward? Well, firstly, like we just said, it means the return of loads of really, really shitty reality TV shows, and probably lots of bizarre sports coverage of sports you'd never in a million years think would be covered. Get ready for
ESPN the Ocho.
get ready for wiffle ball, professional wiffle ball.
Oh man,
Do you
pickleball.
know? Again, the cynic in me will also say, I bet you women's football is going to get a lot more promotion now.
I didn't know that the league's still around here.
Well, I was about to say, in the States, women's football's massive compared to the rest of the world, actually, to be fair,
Oh
isn't it?
wait,
Because
now I just realized you're talking about
soccer.
football, not American football.
Yeah.
Because the only American football, there is a women's league that I knew of, but it was the American Lingerie Football League,
I don't think
which
that's the same thing these days.
it's not very not much not the same. But yes, football. Yes, you're right. I think there's a potential even for the men's football here to grow.
Well,
Honestly,
Ted
especially with
Lasso.
Messi coming to
Yeah,
Ted
Messi coming
Lasso,
to.
Messi in Miami, who's been spotted, who I think was probably already a surprise because probably I wasn't expecting anyone to recognize him. But if you're going to be recognized, it's probably going to be Miami with a lot of Hispanics down there. But yeah,
So when you
what
go
was
into a
it?
game, man, you get a chance to go and see Messi, man. I'd definitely take the drive.
Well, I don't know how you're going to react to this, but I have two friends who are big Manchester United fans. So eventually they want to take me to a game or at least to a pub to watch a game. I've learned very quickly with Manchester United fans, don't even mention the word city because they don't take it lightly.
I feel like we should save the football talk for when we got David back because
Yes, you're right. You're right.
he'll he'll have a
But
lot to say on that.
again, I think one thing that we didn't really mention, I want to just stick in here.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about big major stars, big shows, but one of the things that really is affecting is the smaller actors that make up a lot more of the shows and TV movies than you realize. And how are they threatened? There's actually talk that these small background actors would be scanned and they would be used for one day. And then after that one day, they would leave. And then these scanned digitals would be filling in the background. And the actors that were scanned would not be paid for that work. They would
And
not
they
be
could
paid
use
for
it forever.
indefinitely.
Yeah.
And I think as well, obviously, as the actors, that is a horrible deal. but that's just showing you how far these execs and these studios are going to save money and to screw people
I
over.
mean, surely they're going to get to the stage, right, where it's cheaper to have an actual person on the set in the background than it is to do all the CGI work and processing that's needed to
Mhm.
recreate that many people, right? I'm sure at some point the balance has got to tip the other way.
Yeah. Well, I think that these execs don't realize just how much work it is for this is again a full other conversation about the computer graphics, the CGI teams, the people who create the special effects. They're being
Yeah.
over that. They're being overworked to an nth degree. And these guys are, and that's why we're getting crappy CGI from these movies that should be much better, with these
You know what
budgets.
it is, mate? The common phrase I'm about to say that is so relevant in my industry, and I hear it all the time. I've even
Hmm.
been on set when I've heard someone say this phrase, and that phrase is, "Don't worry about it. We'll fix it in post."
Famous last words.
You
Hey,
cannot fix everything in post.
do you want to hear something really interesting that kind of puts a lot of this in perspective? Ant-Man and the Wasp, a huge tempo movie. It costs more to make than the first Dune movie, but the first Dune movie looks so much better. And they both used a ton of CGI. But guess what? Dune had more time to work on its visuals. And
Yeah.
that really shows you how the Marvel movies, unfortunately, are being pushed out so quickly, and they're not just suffering story wise, but visually, they're not as nearly as good as what Dune could be.
You kind of hitting on a thing there. I think, do you think audiences are actually going to be there for virtual representations of actors as well? I mean, for people of I say our generation and older, you'd absolutely want to see a proper person you want to see an
Hmm.
actual actor. But when we get to the stage where you can't tell with the technology being that good and there's a digital actor up there or a digital creation, I think young generations to a point might not care at all, man.
I mean, I think you're correct in the sense that they just won't know the difference. They'll
Yeah.
see old movies and they'll see new movies and oh, this is just a different way of seeing a movie. And yeah, it's definitely. I mean, with all that's going down, I think, however small, it is a possibility that those kinds of movies are going to be made. I mean, granted, to some degree, the Avatar movies, they're literally all CG characters, but we're getting voiceovers. So it just depends on how you see the nuances. But yeah,
Mm.
it's definitely a possibility, which I think we have to worry about.
But I mean, what will we be doing going forward? I was there thinking the other day, if there's no new movies or TV shows coming out, what are we going to be talking about on We Need a Road? Well, don't
Um,
worry, listener, because there is a shitload of TV shows and movies that I will make David and Jose watch that you probably
yes.
haven't seen. And also, we are going to start doing some deep dives on some of our favorite films soon. We've been
Hmm.
promising a Patreon for a long time, and we're finally going to start looking into that and putting some bonus
Yeah,
episodes out there for you. We're going to have a merch store at some point soon as well, because we've
that'd
got
be
a really
great.
cool logo, and that's going to go on t-shirts that you can buy from us and fund our super yachts, because we want to be just like all these executives who
Ooh,
have,
yeah.
500 million spare floating around. I mean,
Now,
you can make that from doing a podcast, right? Yeah, of course you can.
here, let
Um,
us know if we should create a poll on the Bird app, so to
the
speak.
bird,
Maybe somewhere else, but like let's create a poll on things that you would like to pay for to hear on Patreon. Or maybe if you want
definitely.
to see our videos of us recording in our dirty rooms or something like that. Yeah.
That sounds like more like an OnlyFans, to be fair, Jose.
Oh, you're right. I'm mixing up my apps.
You're mixing up your apps yet. Anyway, what will the resolution be for the writers and actors strike? And when will it be? Well, my take is, I'm guessing it's going to be around October, November time. And as with all strikes, it's only going to go until one side has lost way too much money. Question is,
Hmm.
who's going to break first? The studios, who are suddenly going to get their bosses and all the shareholders, and they're going to be losing millions and billions, or is it going to be the writers and actors, who have probably taken, well, they said most writers have other day jobs anyway to support themselves. A lot of these lower level actors have other jobs to support themselves as well. I think they're going to be okay. I can see this dragging on. What I think is going to happen is, I think the best we can expect from both sides is you're going to get a negotiation around October, November time, and a few rich old studio heads who are pretty much on the verge of retirement anyway, they're going to go. They're going to walk away. They're going to take early
Retire.
retirement, and it'll be this
Yes.
token gesture of, yes, we've won. They've gone. And literally, the next guy, white guy who's about 70, will just step in and take over. And
Mm.
they'll make a show of doing all this studio house cleaning, and understand then that nothing really changes, and that as long as we've always known it, the people who make the content and the movies and the shows are always going to make a lot less than the people who own it and distribute it.
I think that's almost a somewhat optimistic view.
Well,
but
I thought that was pretty dark, to be fair, Jose.
I mean, I think the part that got me was that someone would retire and step aside, and I mean, I think we'll be lucky if that happens. I think if there's two situations with this strike, either it's going to be done in 2 to 3 weeks, because with the actors striking, that could have been something that didn't take into account, that they didn't expect, or it's going to be November, December, because this was completely expected from the execs and they were
planned.
ready. Yeah. So I'm more hopeful for the earlier part, but maybe something wild happens and then they do go to that guy's house and meet him in person. We don't know.
Hellboy turns up on your doorstep.
I think right now we're definitely in the Wild West, because again, this was unprecedented. It hasn't happened since the 60s, which
has not happened in, was it 63 years?
And back then it was just about distribution or residuals. Now it's more than that. It's so
well,
it's
no,
much,
do you know
much
what? I think it's the same thing, actually, and half of it is the same thing. Back in the 60s, it was about stuff being shown on TV for the first time, and we need more money for that. And now it's about streaming. Whenever there's a new avenue for content and movies to be shown on, they have to have the negotiation. So I'm sure everyone should look back. I mean, we don't know because we haven't clearly researched that one. But what did they do in the 60s? What was the agreement then? Did they meet in the middle? Did one side get more than the other side? Don't know. But hey, look it up and let us know. Yeah, do the work for us. Well, I think that was a slightly more positive note than we was expecting at the end.
Well, hopefully, in the time that it takes to post this podcast, not a lot has changed, but in the sense that we don't expect a lot of good to happen yet.
Yeah, hopefully by the time this episode comes out, the strike will be over, the actors will be back to work, the writers will be getting paid what they want. But let's be honest, we don't. That's Disneyland we're living in, not the real world. This is going to drag on and on for months, and it's just going to be self-destruction on both sides. And that's a really pleasant way to end the podcast. We'll see you next time, guys. But coming up soon, we are going to be doing an initial spoiler special reaction to Mission Impossible 7. This message will self-destruct in 5 seconds.
We needed roads.